Ladies and gentlemen, I present Catherine Grenier. Catherine.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a very high-level and very special high-level closing panel. And I really thank you all because I know it's been a long conference. It's been great. Lots of people need to catch flights, so I'm really glad to see the number of you that are here. We're going to be talking about the importance of partnerships and why we need to increase our investment together to deliver tangible outcomes on the ground. And I'm sure you've heard it many times through this session. The expression of growing the pie together has been on many, many, many panels. I'm excited to serve as a moderator for this great panel. And to set the stage, I'd like to share with you a very short video that showcases a long-standing winning partnership that us at NCC, along with our colleagues that are many of them in the room, of Ducks Unlimited Canada, Wildlife Habitat Canada, and the Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts that represents hundreds of local and regional land trusts across the country, are proud to deliver with the Government of Canada.
To mitigate climate change and biodiversity loss, people around the country are partnering to conserve and restore nature, to save species, support livelihoods, and secure a resilient future for us all. For nearly 20 years, the Natural Heritage Conservation Program has rallied Canadians to conserve nature and build a lasting legacy. This year, the program's partners mark a milestone. Together, we've raised the funds to triple the Government of Canada's investment, delivering a total of more than $1.5 billion for nature. We've helped conserve a total of 8,400 square kilometers of forests, grasslands, coastlines, and wetlands. That's 900 hockey rinks worth of nature, conserved every day since 2007. Through more than 2,200 projects across the country, we're helping nature and communities thrive. This lasting legacy will only grow more important in the future because conservation is a key solution to climate change and biodiversity loss. The Natural Heritage Conservation Program conserves nature that Canadians depend on so we can all thrive in a resilient world.
And that's a very good example of how we power conservation by investing in partnerships. So the Natural Heritage Conservation Program is a remarkable success, one that delivers results year over year over year. And if you're curious and you want to see specific example, I think on pretty much all of the table, there's a copy of the report of the last year, all the work that's been delivered by all the partners. And at this milestone moment, where we celebrate surpassing $1.5 billion raise in support of conservation, I am very pleased to welcome a very great panel. And maybe I'll ask for all the panel to join me here, and then I'll introduce us to Minister Guilbeault. Want to join us? So before we start the panel, I'd like to introduce le ministre de l'Environnement et des Changements climatiques, Stephen Guilbeault, à venir nous dire quelques mots.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. Friends, colleagues, in true Canadian fashion, I will be talking in both official languages. I understand there's simultaneous translation if you need it. Alors, je suis très heureux de me joindre à vous aujourd'hui avec toute l'équipe de conservation de la nature du Canada, ainsi que du Réseau international pour la conservation des terres. J'aimerais d'abord souligner et rendre hommage aux premiers peuples de ces lieux et reconnaître que nous sommes à la croisée du territoire du peuple Huron-Wendat, ainsi que de la nation Innu, Atikamekw, Wabanaki et Wastoluk. Les Québécois et les Canadiens reconnaissent que notre héritage naturel est une véritable richesse. Et nous ne pouvons jamais prendre cet héritage comme acquis. C'est un précieux cadeau qu'on doit préserver et protéger ensemble. Notre existence, notre bien-être en dépendent. Most of you here are from Canada, but I understand we have some friends who are from far and wide. So for those of you, I'll give you a few stats about us and about why it matters when we do things on conservation in Canada. Our lovely country possesses 20% of the world's freshwater reserves, 24% of milieu humide, marshlands, 25% of temperate forests, and 33% of the boreal forests. But unfortunately, like everywhere else around the world, these beauties are under threat by the combination of increased pollution, climate change, and our ecosystems are feeling the impacts. That's why our government decided in 2015, to launch the largest conservation campaign in the history of our country. So far, the federal government has committed $12 billion in various programs to help ensure that we do a better job when it comes to conserving nature in Canada. Et évidemment, ce travail-là, ce n'est pas un travail qu'on peut faire tout seul. Et je pense que le thème du panel, qui est celui de la collaboration, est au centre de notre action, surtout dans un pays comme le Canada, où les différentes juridictions ont un rôle à jouer, le gouvernement fédéral certainement, mais les provinces, les territoires, les peuples autochtones, qui ont également un rôle très important à jouer dans tout ça. And that's also why we feel we have an obligation, and we had an obligation when the UN approached us in June of 2022 to step up for COP15 to do our part. And as you know, COPs are complex conferences to organize from just a purely logistical point of view. It's complicated from a political point of view. Usually, a government that decides to host one of these conferences will take a year or two to prepare in advance. The UN approached us in June of 2022 to host a COP that was going to take place 6 months later. So I went to see the Prime Minister and I said, boss, so the UN wants us to do that. And it usually takes about a year or two, and we have 6 months. Oh, and by the way, we'll have to do everything with China. A lot of people within my government started questioning my sanity at that point, and actually a lot of people didn't want us to do that within the government. But the Prime Minister and Minister Joly, our Foreign Affairs Minister, really believed that it was a moment where we could help bring people together, and that we had not only an opportunity, but we had a responsibility to do it. And that's what we did. But we didn't do it together. I mean, if COP16 was a success, it was because of all of you. It was because of organizations like yours. It was because of the role of Indigenous people in Canada and from around the world. It was the City of Montreal. It was the government of Quebec. It was everyone stepping up to the plate to say, we want this to be a success. And by working together, it was a success. Now we have to make it a success in terms of implementation. We have to make sure that we get to achieve the various targets we set for ourselves in Montreal. We're making tremendous progress in Canada. Alors, quand notre gouvernement est arrivé au pouvoir en 2015, notre pays ne protégeait à peine 1% de nos espaces côtiers, de nos océans. Aujourd'hui, on est à presque 15%. Je pense qu'il y a une annonce qui s'en vient plus tard après-midi qui va nous amener au-delà du 16% pour la conservation océanique et côtière. Et on est à peu près à 15% pour ce qui est de la conservation territoriale. So we've made some progress. More than 400,000 hectares of sensitive lands that have been conserved in Canada since 2015. We're also seeing conservation as a path we can walk with Indigenous people for reconciliation. So if you want to come and see me with a project for conservation, whether it's ocean, terrestrial, if Indigenous people aren't part of your project, don't bother. It's not even worth it. I'm serious. every single, whether it's a national park, I announced for the 48th National Park this summer in Prince Edward Island, Bedungeek, which is a totally joint initiative between the Mi'kmaq of Prince Edward Island and Parks Canada from the get-go. In fact, it was their initiative to start with, and they came to us and they said, we want to work with you to create a new national park. Prime Minister in June announced one of the PFP, that was the completion of one of the PFP that was announced at COP15, the one for the Great Bear Sea. I suspect that we will have some very good news on a very, very large conservation project in Northwest Territories in the coming weeks, maybe even days. Could be, to our knowledge, the world's largest Indigenous conservation project, and it's happening. And again, you know, I mean, the federal government can do a lot of things, but we can't do these things by ourselves. So I'm certainly, yeah, I don't like to brag. Politicians tend to do that. I try to avoid it as much as I can, but if you'll allow me and indulge me, I think we have done a lot since 2015, but there's a whole lot more than we need to do. And if you'll indulge me a little bit more, obviously everything that we've done is under threat. There is a very wide consensus in the House of Commons on the need to fight climate change by the vast majority of MPs and political parties. And there's a consensus that we need to do more in terms of reconciliation, in terms of conservation, but there is one notable exception. And that exception is leading in the polls right now. And the leader of that exception has, as a member of parliament, that's the only job he's ever really done. In fact, that's the only job he's ever done. This member of parliament has voted 400 times against measures to protect nature, to fight pollution, and to fight climate change. So there's a very stark choice that will be in front of Canadians in the coming months. I'll stop my, thank you so much for having indulged me on my little political commentary. Je pense que on a fait preuve de leadership lors de la COP 15. On doit continuer de le faire. Comme vous le savez, la COP 16 commence la semaine prochaine à Cali. La ministre colombienne, Susana Mohamed, était ici il y a quelques mois. On travaille très étroitement avec la Colombie pour nous assurer que, évidemment, on puisse mettre en œuvre les objectifs que nous nous sommes donnés lors de la COP 15. Certains objectifs importants pour le Canada dans le cadre de la COP 16, certainement l'établissement d'un mécanisme permanent pour les peuples autochtones avec la Convention sur la diversité biologique. Évidemment, aussi toute la question de la mise en œuvre du séquençage et du partage des bénéfices, notamment pour les pays du Sud et les peuples autochtones à travers la planète. Alors, je vais terminer. Vous savez, les politiciens peuvent parler beaucoup. Je vais essayer d'éviter de le faire. Mais pour nous, la conservation des terres et des océans, c'est un indicateur de la qualité de vie de nos concitoyens et de nos concitoyennes. C'est aussi un indicateur de la vitalité de notre économie. On ne peut pas avoir une économie en santé si le développement économique se fait au détriment des conditions de vie sur Terre. Je pense que c'est assez fondamental pour nous. Et de plus en plus, je pense qu'il y a une prise de conscience de tous les bienfaits des infrastructures naturelles pour notre santé, pour notre bien-être en tant qu'espèce. Et pour nous, la protection des espaces, c'est aussi une question de résilience pour les communautés face aux impacts des changements climatiques. Alors, plus que jamais, il est essentiel de protéger nos communautés contre les effets des catastrophes naturelles qui sont de plus en plus importantes. On pense aux inondations, encore une rivière atmosphérique en Colombie-Britannique la semaine dernière. On pense aux feux de forêt, on pense aux vagues de chaleur. Et nous le savons toutes et tous, we all know this, but I think it's worth repeating. Our best ally in the fight against climate change is nature. The more we can protect and enhance nature around the world, the more we will be able to face the impacts of climate change. And we can't do that without you. Au nom du gouvernement du Canada et à mon nom personnel, je vous remercie énormément. I want to thank you all for all of the work you do day in, day out to help us do more together. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much. Merci.
Monsieur le ministre, merci beaucoup d'avoir pris le temps de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui puis de nous avoir si bien démarré pour la conversation en nous inspirant. Je vous remercie pour votre leadership, votre partenariat. Puis je pense que votre appel à travailler ensemble, il a déjà été entendu dans la salle, mais il continue d'être entendu. Il y a une salle ici qui est prête à en faire plus puis à vous supporter dans vos efforts. Before we delve into questions, I'm keen to explore. I'm thrilled to introduce the wonderful panel we have here today. So of course, we have Minister Guilbeault that's staying with us. We all know Grand Chief Mandy Galmasti, who was honored last night with prestigious Conservation Visionary Award. Welcome, and many thanks for joining us again and offering your important perspective. I'm also delighted to welcome Elliot Campbell, who's Partner National Climate Leader with PwC Canada. Welcome. As well as Carla Smith, who's Executive Vice President, Chief People, Strategy, and Climate Officer from Intact Financial Corporation. You're two inspiring leaders transforming how the private sector is getting involved into making a big difference in nature. So thank you very much for joining us today. As we start the question, for the past 2 days, the private and civic land conservation community has discussed key themes and issues. We've talked about conservation finance. I know a lot of people in this room have participated in this stream. We've talked about land stewardship and management. We talked about conservation law and policy, organization and governance, as well as large landscape conservation. And as we're closing this incredible Congress with recognition that we all need to do more, especially when it comes to expanding partnerships and bringing investment into projects that deliver meaningful and measurable climate and biodiversity outcomes. What we all recognize is without further investment, we may slow the pace of loss, but we will be continuing to lose. So we need more winning solution, and I hope this panel will provide some great nuggets from what I've already discussed. I know it's coming, that we could all build on and continue to accomplish way more. So panel, are you ready? All right, so let's get started. Minister, je vais commencer avec vous. To address the size of the 30 by 30 challenge, what whole of society levers do we need to deploy to create space and a call for action for more partners, particularly the private sector, to come to the table and contribute to conservation in a more tangible way?
Well, thank you, Catherine. I think we have to collectively innovate and develop new tools in the past few years in Canada to help us do more when it comes to conservation. The PFP is certainly one notable example. More investment and different types of investment by the federal government. IPCAs, for example, are a cornerstone of our strategy to ensure that we can do more when it comes to conservation. But I'll be a bit political again, but work with me here.
Be careful.
You know, there is a wave of populism that's going through many of our countries all around the world, and it is unfortunately difficult, if not impossible, for me sometimes as federal environment minister to work with certain jurisdictions. But many of you can. They won't talk to me, or barely. They won't work with me, but they'll work with you. And I think, you know, whether it's groups like CNC, Indigenous peoples, the private sector. So I think our ability to work together, to be able to talk, to coordinate and maybe to scheme a little bit together, I think is very important to enable us to achieve the type of objectives that we've set for ourselves. So these type of forums and this kind of dialogue, I think is really the key. And Catherine is trying not to smile, but she knows exactly what I'm talking about, because her and I have conversation. I won't name names.
Conversation about conservation.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it is definitely key. We've seen the really rapid growth of ocean and coastline protection in Canada since 2015. It's easier. It's largely in the courtyard of Indigenous peoples and the federal government. For terrestrial conservation, it's a bit more complicated. We can work very well with some jurisdiction, not with others. That's where all of you come in, so we can work together to achieve our common goals.
And I think that's great. And it's very aligned with the theme we've been talking about, the power of relationship and the power of partnership. Grand Chief Mandy, I'm curious. I'd like to hear you about how Indigenous-led conservation is helping mobilize and evolve knowledge in economic development.
Well, you know, I have to say that when I look at the participation of Indigenous peoples in conservation, I frame it in two ways. One, that is a secret weapon for success because you are engaging individuals that have in-depth and intimate knowledge of those spaces. And second, I see it as a guarantee. It's a guarantee on investment. You are getting that social acceptability, you are getting that input, you are essentially going into partnership with a super overqualified group. I'll brag about Indigenous peoples. They're very qualified because of the knowledge that they carry. It is not cyclical knowledge, it is knowledge that is really based on millenniums of relationship with that territory. And you know, I'm very proud of the Cree Nation. We have had a lot of success in the terrestrial space, and I'm really pleased that, you know, later on today, we will be announcing our marine conservation area in partnership with Canada. It's a pleasure for us to expand the work that we do into the waterways that surround USG. And that would not be possible if we didn't really challenge the partnership too. You know, there is a lot of innovation, I have to say, on Canada's side in being our partner. There was an openness. And, you know, I have to echo the statement that the minister made. He really put Indigenous peoples at the forefront in their projects. And that was the vibe that we got from their departments, the support that we got, the way that they approached us, the openness and the space that they gave to us to tell that story and to really hear from us. I think from a grassroots, bottom-up approach to working together is really what signifies to me is an essential component for success. So I encourage you, if you are pursuing or you're having those opportunities to talk to those individuals who maybe don't want to talk to other levels of government, to really make that a component, a foundational component in your statement to say, we are here to work with the land, but we are here to ensure that the work that we do is reflected by those individuals who are part of that land, much like my nation. We cannot be EU without USG, like Jim said yesterday. Many nations feel that way. Their ties to the territory are critical for their culture and identity.
Thank you so much. I think openness is a recurring theme. I took great note of that. We're certainly also open, Elliot, to see the private sector participate even more fully in the nature agenda. And I'm curious to hear from you, what opportunities and challenges do you see to increase that participation?
Well, I'll start by piggybacking off of the last answer, which is that we'll start with knowledge, right? When you look at sectors like agri-food or pharma, where the connection between nature and their business or nature and profit is proximate or obvious or clear, that's where we're seeing the most action. So particularly with partnership with people like all of you, what about banking? What about manufacturing? What about real estate? Clearly there's a connection in those sectors also. It's less obvious, less clear to those businesses, less top of mind. And so that's a first area for partnership, is that building knowledge, understanding of what the challenge and the opportunity is. I think the second issue, which is perhaps more of a challenge right now facing businesses, is that it's a busy space, it's a competing agenda. Within sustainability, there's regulatory reporting, climate change, people are saying, we just figured out scope 3, and now you want to talk about nature? And then, of course, on the boardroom agenda, you've got AI, geopolitics, a number of other issues that are competing for space. One thing that does help, frankly, and it's not so much partnership, maybe it's the antonym of partnership, one thing that helps bring things up to the top of the agenda is regulation. And we see that in climate change quite clearly. In this country, there's been some fantastic motion with, for example, B15 in the banking and insurance sector for federally regulated financial institutions. We see it in Europe with CSRD around sustainability. Rises up the agenda. It also makes it very clear what government and, frankly, what we are all asking for businesses to understand and disclose. So that sort of competing interest, the competing priorities is the second challenge. I think from my perspective, one of the things that business needs to do better as part of the partnership is to articulate the ask. Like when I think about net zero, and almost every business that we work with has some either interim or 2050 net zero goal. Basically, if I summarize everything and I take out all of the noise, what it comes down to is having access to low or zero emission electricity. That's it. That's in every single plan. And sure, there are certain nuances in certain sectors like agriculture that fall outside that. But even with our agriculture clients, having access to a zero emissions grid is essential to getting to net zero. And so you see it in every corporate climate change plan that we're going to go 100% renewable energy, and we'll use, for example, VPPAs or other, EACs or other basically financial instruments to procure low or zero carbon energy if it's not provided to us. And so anyway, all I'm saying is that in that net zero world, there's a very clear demand signal from the private sector to say, particularly to government, we need the electricity grid to be perfectly clean. And I think that for businesses, as we start to say we want to be nature positive, or we want to take steps towards nature positive, we have to very clearly articulate what is that demand side ask for government and also for our suppliers and our partners.
You can go. I don't think that warrants comments. You got it from the room already. Carla, at Intact, you're already involved, already doing projects on the nature agenda. So I'm wondering, how does the private sector think strategically about investing in projects that help tackle climate change and biodiversity loss? And you're speaking from a place of already doing it. So I'm really curious to see what drives it.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to share Intact's perspective, but maybe before doing that, just to make sure we all know who Intact is. We're Canada's largest property and casualty insurer. So we insure about 1 in 5 homes, cars, or businesses. And we also have a sizable business now in the US and in the UK. But because of what we do day to day, we are sort of in the weather business. And so maybe naturally our entry point for investing in climate change, and that includes nature, is really around helping our customers, adapt to and become more resilient to what we see as rapidly evolving weather patterns. And so as we've seen the problem in our own data, in our own day-to-day with our customers get bigger and bigger over the years, we've wanted to do more. But the topic is so large and you could get drawn in so many different directions that you could easily have a diluted impact. So when we think about investing as a corporation, we actually started with 3 key principles that we felt would keep us focused. The first one is around, de-risking the transition to net zero, because risk is our business. And it's really a statement about staying in our lane and bringing the strengths that we have to bear to the equation. The second thing is we want to take an inclusionary approach to this transition. And really that's a statement about feeling that our best opportunity here is to educate and influence, and that it really is in partnership and in dialogue that we will be able to help others make that transition as well. And the third principle is something Elliot was alluding to. We're going to do our best to really search for those intersections between helping and winning. Because when we can find them, we'll be able to put the full force of our resources, our expertise, and our time and effort behind those projects, because there will be no question that it's worthwhile. So we work really hard to find those. So with that as our starting point, we've actually created a framework that we now call our climate strategy, in which we have 5 big intentions. And this is sort of the framework by which we measure what we're going to put our investments towards. So the first one, Elliot talked about, we too have a net zero commitment. We call this our commit big intention. So across our business by 2050, and in our operations emissions, we will halve by 2030. We've been focused on adaptation, the second pillar, for over a decade, probably because of what we do. We see the struggle of our customers on the front line in the aftermath of severe weather events. And so that remains a very big part. In fact, we want to double down on our efforts to improve resilience and adaptive capacity in society. The third big intention, because we have the privilege of having a relationship with so many Canadians, we want to take the opportunity to leverage our platform to shape consumer behavior. It's a bit the demand side of the equation, as has been discussed. And so, you know, in a real way, that's a bit helping society help themselves, education and mobilizing activity really at the consumer level. The fourth pillar is something we call enable. It's two-pronged. The first is, you know, helping those industries that need to do the hard work of decarbonizing and reducing their own emissions and standing by them and helping as they do that hard work. But the second is we know that we need to bring more solutions online as a society in order to get to net zero, and we think we have a role to play in supporting those burgeoning industries who need to grow and to buy insurance through that transition in order to bring those solutions online. And last but certainly not least, and it has been well talked about already in the panel, I won't belabor it, but our fifth big intention is we do intend to collaborate. We have strengths to bear in the dialogue, but we know that, you know, we'll need to take an all of society approach. We'll have to do it together. So we will give of our time sitting at those tables and trying to be action oriented about solutions.
Winning together. I love that one.
Yeah.
That one will certainly stay. Monsieur le ministre, on a parlé de la COP 15, de votre rôle de leader. Vous partez la semaine prochaine à la COP 15, à la COP 16. Je suis curieuse de savoir un peu de quoi va avoir l'air votre leadership là-bas, puis comment vous pensez qu'on peut augmenter les investissements pour livrer sur nos cibles, particulièrement notre cible de 30 par 30.
So yeah, I mean, COP16 is about implementation of the beginning of the implementation of the agreement that came about in Montreal. There's a number of things that we will be looking at very closely. The establishment of a permanent mechanism for Indigenous peoples, something the Colombian minister and I have spoken about for all sorts of historical reasons. They're interested in having a forum for Afro-descendant as well. So it's certainly going to be a part of the conversation. How do we mobilize funds globally? So when the GEF launched the new GBF fund, we were the first out the door, $200 million. We were hoping that, you know, it would get people into action and a bunch of countries would follow. It's been a mitigated success so far. I think right now there's about 600, a little more than 600 million. So it's not nothing, but it's not what we and many others were hoping for. We understand that, you know, the fiscal context is complicated in many countries, and I'm having conversations with many of my peers to say, you know, not there to preach, but what do you think you can do? And that being said, the OECD just published a report in September that shows that for the achievement of the 20 billion by 2025, we're almost at $16 billion of global mobilized for biodiversity and nature conservation. So we are making, if we're not making tremendous progress on the GBF fund per se, overall mobilization of funds globally is going pretty well. I mean, we have to get we're close to 16. We have to get to 20 by next year. I think it's feasible, but it will require a lot of work and a lot of collaboration between countries. To make sure, and especially countries that can give and support projects in the global south. And obviously the important issue that many of us will be following is DSI, digital sequencing, which is a complex, complicated, yet such an important issue for the global south, and especially indigenous peoples in the global south. Many of the benefits of the pharmaceutical industry and ag and others are derived from nature and from nature product that are taken from these lands. It was complicated in Montreal. It's going to be complicated in Cali as well. I think we're in good hands. Susanna Mohamed is an extremely capable, dedicated environment minister, and frankly, the government of Colombia is getting very involved in COP16. Things were complicated geopolitically in Montreal 2 years ago. It's not easier right now. If anything, it's gotten a bit more complicated. But what struck me in Montreal, and I think this was certainly exemplified by our relationship with China. I mean, so when I started working with the Chinese minister in the lead up to COP15, Canada had, we basically had no more diplomatic relations to speak of with China. And I think both of us, Minister Wong and I, and our countries, decided that, you know, if we are to be successful internationally in the protection of nature, and it's true of climate change, we need to be able to set our differences aside and focus on what unites us. And we did that. Not just Canada and China, although certainly Canada and China. I was invited in Beijing last summer, summer of 2023, sorry. It was the first time in 5 years that the Canadian minister was invited to China. And I think, you know, we are seeing that the environment can be part of soft diplomacy. And it can be something where we may be having a really hard time having conversations with certain countries on certain issues, but not on nature, not on climate. So certainly hoping that we collectively keep that momentum and that mentality going in Cali, despite all of the other things that are happening and all of the other challenges, that we remain focused and dedicated to make this a success.
You really found a way to win together. I hope you will find some more. It's also good to be reminded how nature unites, right? Like our goal is nature, but nature is also what brings us together. And Carla, at Intact, you've been focusing on adaptation for over a decade. And we know that one way you're moving the needle is through nature-based solution.
Yeah.
It's another way of looking at how nature unites. So can you tell us more about your work on adaptation?
I would love to. So in a very real way in our industry, Mother Nature is often the challenge that we are facing, right, in large weather events. But we have come to know over time that, in fact, nature can also be our best defense against those events. And so I would love to share with you 3 examples of how this is working in action, how we're investing in adaptation. I have many more, but I'll limit myself to 3. It's a topic we're very dedicated to. So the first one, Catherine, is one you're familiar with. So please feel free to chime in here if I don't do it justice. But last year, we embarked on a 5-year partnership with the Nature Conservancy of Canada to focus on the delivery of nature-based solutions and with a principal focus on wetlands. We have become quite inspired in our industry by the power of wetlands because they're very useful in building the resilience of local communities to flood and actually reducing the damage and the suffering that occurs in the aftermath of a flood. But we also know that they have the double benefit of being carbon sinks. And so through our commitment to net zero, we find this very inspiring. And so we're working with the NCC on that. And I think so far, together, just in our first year, we've protected north of 10,000 hectares of critical ecosystems. So very proud of that. A second partnership that we are very proud of is an institute known now as the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo. They bear our name because our funds helped to create that institute, but they are at an arm's length. They're a scientific institution that sits within the Faculty of the Environment, reports up to the Dean at the University of Waterloo. And we stood them up over 10 years ago because we felt a duty to make sure that the science of adaptation and resilience was being paid attention to. And not only that, but that the messages around resilience and adaptation were getting out into society. And so for a decade, and hopefully for many decades more, the Intact Centre has been very focused on delivering that science and communicating that science. People can't care about or act on what they don't understand. And so humbly, I think they have become one of Canada's most credible voices on the science of adaptation. And so those two partnerships are big, and they have been and will continue to be making a big difference. But my third example is about smaller partnerships. So we also know that oftentimes it's municipalities that are on the front lines of making decisions and investments in adaptation and resilience. So the third example I'm going to share of how we're investing there is something we call the Intact Municipal Climate Resiliency Grants. So this is a fund that we have stood up essentially to create a competitive process for municipalities to apply for grant money. And it's a competitive process. We consider, among other things, the return on investment from an adaptation and resilience perspective. And so this allows municipalities to really, in a very active way, invest frontline while also learning about what are going to be the things that are going to make the biggest difference for the community. So during our first round of grants, which was a couple of years ago, a number of the winning submissions actually were around nature-based solutions. So it's alive and well inside that granting window. And just in case there's anyone in the audience who might be working with a municipality, just wanted you guys to know that our latest granting window will be allocating another $2 million over the next year to projects like these. That granting window is right now open and will be open through January, so spread the word.
Thank you very much. And for me, it's a really good example of going from intent to action. So thank you very much to Intact for leading the way. And speaking of leading the way, Elliot, I'm curious to see from your experience, because you've really been supporting private investment in climate change, how can we apply that to nature-related investments?
And just before I address your question, I just want to emphasize what Carla said. I used to work in the City of Toronto as the Chief Resilience Officer. We made a huge step forward, I would say, within the municipality on adaptation with the help of the Intact Centre on Adaptation. So thank you. And I want to say it is real. It is happening in municipalities.
While we're at it, can I also...
Oh boy.
I love it.
I mean, really, Intact and the Institute have been incredible allies to the federal government for the elaboration of the first ever national adaptation strategy.
Yes.
And you continue to be an incredible partner. So
Thanks to you as well. We are
we'll
very
add it.
proud of Canada's national adaptation
See, winning
strategy.
together.
So then the question was, how do we drive more investment? And I think, when we reflect on climate change, people say, what can we take from climate change to learn from for nature investment? And people are always looking at climate change mitigation. And that's the wrong place to look, unfortunately, because in mitigation, we have this wonderful tons of CO2e, which we can put a price to, and we have put a price to, and it actually makes the business case quite straightforward. So when we're supporting companies or investors or banks or insurers with climate scenario analysis, looking forward at how climate change is going to impact the business, on the mitigation side, it's straightforward. You look at the potential emissions, you can put a price of carbon. It's not super straightforward, but I'm simplifying here. You've got a really good metric there. On the adaptation side, it's not so straightforward. And in fact, one of the biggest challenges outside of P&C and to a lesser degree life insurance, it's quite hard to put a price on that future loss that you're avoiding. And that's the similar challenge as in nature. So it's really the adaptation side where we need to look. One of the challenges that we've had, particularly of late when we look at some of the regulation, like from the SEC, and some of the expectations from investors on companies, they want to say, well, what's the cost, right? What are we talking about here in terms of the financial impact of nature loss or climate change adaptation on a business? And I think that's very valuable and a worthwhile thing to do. But also encourage all of you who are working with businesses to allow yourselves and themselves to also take a step back and look at the qualitative. Because sometimes this, like what I'll call an excessive focus on financial quantification, you just end up with a number that's wrong. And then people will start asking, well, how do we come up with that number? What's this? But if you take a step back and just think strategically, okay, how does nature loss impact my business? How does climate change adaptation impact my business? Sometimes you get more relevant answers than when you're really focused on turning into something like tons of CO2e multiplied by a price on carbon.
Understanding each other. That's at the roots of a lot of our relationship. Grand Chief Mandy, we've talked a lot about government leadership. We've talked about private sector leadership. You've told us about the importance of Indigenous-led conservation. In fact, you said it's a secret weapon, and I think we all really believe that, but I've never heard it put that way. I'm curious, how do you think government and the private sector can build and leverage relationship to help communities thrive. And I'd love to hear it from the Cree context, but also for other Indigenous nations.
I think that for us, our success in the projects that we undertook was really based on those critical partnerships. The NGO community was a huge driving factor for us to succeed. NCC was, a major part of that framework. And I think in the learning that I have done during the process of this project being carried out, we started in a space that was looking at a project. The potential of the benefit of a project. And we have very quickly entered into a new space that to me I think is kind of frightening, where it's now a critical component for success, for maintaining ESG. And one of the things that I really encourage everybody in this space, and especially government, is to really focus on that narrative that we're putting out. We are no longer in an era of climate change. We are in an era of climate crisis. I encourage government, I encourage private sector, I encourage NGO to start shifting the mindset and making your benefactors, your project promoters, your partners, your funders understand that the work that we are doing is critical to our survival. I really think that this is something very important. Because of the short time that our project was carrying out, seeing it go from something that was a positive to something that was necessary is a trend that we have to be very honest about. And I'm so pleased that we started this journey with a government that was very open with us, that was a huge benefactor. We were one of the recipients of the Challenge Fund. It really allowed our project to succeed. And I think this is one of the things that I'm so encouraged of, having seen this government that's in place be contributing to so many Indigenous projects, because for us it's really ensuring the livelihood of our territories. And like I said earlier, the livelihood of Indigenous peoples. But we have to ensure, we are all one, we are all humankind in this room. The narrative has to really, I think, be having a little bit more pressure in it. We cannot just commit to targets. We have to live up to targets, because we are borrowing time from future generations. And this is something that is, at the core belief of Indigenous peoples. We plan for 7 generations ahead. This is why this work is so important to us. That's something that I encourage you to think of, in the work that you're undertaking, not just the shift in narrative that it is moving towards urgency, requirement, but that it is something that you're contributing to the next generations that are coming. I'm pleased that the private sector, views this as an importance. I think it's these kinds of relationships across different segments in society that really push this reality forward. It is one that we have to be very honest with ourselves, the urgency and the importance of it. This work is critical for us, and we want all countries to ensure that they're understanding the goals that Canada has set and how they've committed to work, with all segments of the population, because it is one that I think is an international success. Like I said yesterday, we view the Cree Nations projects as a commitment not only to ESG, but a contribution to the global fight against climate. So this is the mantra that, I think narrative is so important for you to push things forward. And I hope that when you leave this conference, you will take that mindset with you and share that message in other international spaces.
Thank you so much for those wise words. I know you all have planes to catch, but if you're like me, I could stay the whole afternoon and continue, because I have 1,000 more questions to ask, and I feel we have so many powerful leaders around this stage and in this room to create more solutions. But if I reflect back, there's a couple of messages that I've heard that I think are important, and certainly you won't recap everything that's been said, but one thing we heard very clearly is government leadership is necessary, but government can't get there alone. It needs all of us. We all have a specific role, a unique role to play, and we need to play it together. I heard, and I'm quite optimist from what you said, Elliot, how there's opportunity to grow the pie together, and by understanding each other better and understanding business goals, we could do more. Like, we're just on the verge of unlocking more, and that's a really good message of hope. And speaking of hope, when I hear Intact's example and it's already doing it and it's working and you're showing others how you could pursue business objective in a way that serves the entire community, I think that's also powerful. And as you said, we need to share that narrative more. We need to showcase those good examples out there, because that's how success is built, is from those small examples. Chief Mandy, your idea around openness and trying new things. We're not going to get there by trying the same old and same old. I think you're blazing new ways and you're inspiring us to continue to try and not be afraid of precedents. And I really take your words around how we're in an era of climate crisis and we really need to shift the mindset. As you said, it's critical to our survival. And one thing I'd love to leave you with is, we've been talking here about winning together, and I'm fundamentally convinced that we could win together. But the flip side, if we don't, is we're all going to be losing together. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists. And Shandy, I'll ask you to come here for closing.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks so much, Catherine. Thank you for that great conversation about conservation. And I know everybody's got a lot to think and discuss about after that amazing panel. I don't think that we could have had a more powerful or compelling way to synthesize the purpose and framing of this Congress, that authentic, meaningful relationships are the key to unlocking the potential of all sectors of society to contribute to the work ahead of us through bold action for nature and working across difference. And it's so inspiring to see Canada's leadership and achievements in investing in and implementing partnerships for conservation. So let's give that panel one more round of applause. So as our time together here draws to a close, I want to thank each of you for being here from near and far, and sometimes very far. You have brought such deep passion and knowledge, insight, and commitment to collaboration to this gathering, and that's what's made it a success. Despite coming from different time zones, you've taken on a packed agenda with sunrise start times, with really good cheer and enthusiasm, so we thank you for that. And you've really made this gathering your own, with weaving ceremony throughout the program, throughout our time together, and making connections that advance your work, your vision, and your ambitions. So please join me again in another round of applause for all of the elders, the speakers, moderators, participants, and supporters who are here with us today, in person and online, for all that you've done to make this Congress a success. Next, I want to thank, with all my heart, the 2024 Global Congress Planning Committee, who served as track leaders and advisors in putting together the content and sessions that you've all engaged in and enjoyed over the past 2 days. So Lisa McLaughlin, Laura Johnson, Peter Stein, Philip Tabis, Sean Johnson, Renee Kivico, Anne-Lisa Jensen, Rob Wilson, Candace Stevens, John Lowndes, Peter Howell, and Robin Lawson, thank you for the time, energy, and thought that you put into shaping this event. And if your hands aren't smarting enough already, most importantly, I want to thank once again the dedicated staff who have orchestrated this entire convening so superbly and worked around the clock to create this time and space for us to be together. Holly Grieg, Robin Austin, Amanda Kent, Veronique Vermette, Kate Ostermiller, Desiree Hubbs, and Alan Wu, Jill Lampe, Lily Robinson, we would literally not be here today without you. It's been such a memorable 2.5 days here with you all in Quebec, and full of story, conversation, learning, and inspiration. I've seen so many of you having ad hoc meetings, hatching plans and ideas, and sharing contact information so that you can put those plans into action. And I can't wait to see how the connections that you've made here or strengthened here reverberate in the future. While it's just a short time together, the impacts of this Congress are really just beginning. And there's a lot to process and reflect on, and later on Don Carr, my colleague from the Nature Conservancy of Canada, will do so. But I think something that we will all take away is that leveraging experience and knowledge from across geographies, cultures, disciplines, worldviews, and sectors is absolutely central to taking on the urgent task ahead of us, to being able to act now and to act wisely to protect nature in Canada and around the globe. So we look forward to continuing this vibrant and growing community of practice in doing so. And on that note, I am delighted to announce our plans for our next ILCN Global Congress 3 years from now. The 5th ILCN Global Congress will take place in partnership with one of our closest network partners over the years, the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, in Melbourne, Australia in 2027. So please join me. Please join me in welcoming my good friends Jody Gunn, CEO, and Vic Marles, Chair of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, to the stage.
Thank you very much, Chandni. So on behalf of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, which I'm going to call ALCA, on behalf of ALCA's board, I would like to say how honoured and proud we are that we're going to be in a position to be able to co-host with the ILCN the 2027 Congress. As Chandni said, ALCA and the ILCN have really had a history as long as it's possible to have. And in Australia, we are really committed to the power of networks. And just on that note, I would personally like to acknowledge the fact that I am here with so many of my, my colleagues from Australia, which is completely amazing to me, and it's been a really special experience, everybody, to be here with you. So the 2027 Congress will be an opportunity for us to bring those two things together, to bring our long relationship with the ILCN and our commitment to networks. So for the last number of days, we've been really inspired by the 2024 Congress, and we want to thank the Nature Conservancy Canada and the ILCN for what a wonderful time, and of course, if you're in our shoes, for guiding us as to the way forward. And you can be sure that we will be in touch to figure out how to do what it is we have, it seems, agreed to do. So, and then the final thing I want to say is we are really excited that you will all be coming to Melbourne in 2027. The one thing I can assure you of is that we love to host people from overseas, and we are great hosts. So we look forward to seeing you then, and I'm going to pass over to Jody to tell you a little bit more about what we think is going to happen. Jody.
Thank you so much, Vic. We are really, as Vic has just said, absolutely excited to be able to host the event in 2027. Australia is a global biodiversity hotspot. It has incredible Indigenous leadership drawn from 60,000 years of long, enduring and continuing connection and care and responsibility for country. We have species that are found there that are found nowhere else in the world. We have so much to show you, but we still also have so much that we want to learn from you. So we can't wait, as Vic has said, to have you all there. The Australian Land Conservation Alliance represents organisations that work to protect, manage and restore nature right across Australia, and to halt species extinctions and to build human and natural communities. As an alliance, the value of networks and learning from each other is really important to using these platforms for change. ALCA runs an annual conference, so we're used to this to some extent, and this year's theme was Nature Now, Action for People and Planet. Last year's theme was Unite for Nature. For us, these themes recognise three common things across the discussions that have also been reflected this week. Urgency, action. I heard many times, we get things done. People might have used a different word to things, but collaboration, cross-sectoral and cross-cultural collaboration was really important. And this year's ILCN and NCC Global Congress was Relationships for a Resilient World, which brings all of these things together and enables them to happen. So again, congratulations ILCN and NCC, and we thank you for your collective efforts across this week. In 2027, when you all come to Melbourne, we will be on track towards 2030, so it'll be absolutely important to gear up and to supercharge our individual and collective actions. So it will be an important time to be there. I heard at the beginning of the Congress this week that people want to strengthen, they want to deepen their connections. So let's continue doing that from today until 2027, which is only a short few years away. We, as ALCA, are confident in our ability to deliver meaningful and engaging programs for this critical global network. We will build a program with our First Nations partners to not only demonstrate and recognise their leadership, and also to ensure that the program is accessible, it's beneficial and it's culturally safe for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and also First Nations peoples around the world. We will carry through the 5 tracks of practice to make sure the program remains relevant to all delegates. That includes First Nations organisations, civil society organisations, private protected area managers, agencies. We're really grateful to our members, to enduring conference partners who we have already partnered with this year and are committing to their partnership right out until 2027, the ANZ and the National Australia Banks. 2 major financial institutions, and the RBC has set them a real challenge for what I'm excited they might be able to come up with at the 2027 Congress. To the Melbourne Convention Bureau and also some longer term partners, and to our members and board, all are backing this in and we thank them. So I just want you to think about what happens between now and 2027. I just want you to take a moment to think of what is your personal goal? What is your challenge? What is the thing that between now and then that you want to achieve, so that when you come, you can tell us how hard you have worked to achieve or work towards a commitment that you're making in our shared and collective purpose in being here today. Jim mentioned the objectives of these congresses, the inspiration we get from being together, the networking that comes, and keeping to build the tools that we need for our work ahead, and we will commit to delivering on those in 2027. So we're super excited. It is worth just noting we do have an incredible Australian delegation here. Please reach out to them as well before you leave, as they will be ambassadors on our pathway through to 2027. Thank you, ILCN and NCC. We look forward to hopefully convening a similarly impactful event as you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic and Jody. We're incredibly excited to work with you on the next Congress, and we hope to see all of you in Melbourne. So you can't say we didn't give you an early enough save the date. Finally, I want to make another important announcement. As you heard yesterday, Jim Levitt will retire in 2025 after more than 4 decades of leadership in land conservation. From the small grove of century-old trees called the Waverly Oaks in his beloved community of Belmont, Massachusetts, to the 28 million acre root of the parks of Patagonia in Chile, Jim's vision, dedication, and deep generosity of spirit has informed and inspired land conservation efforts, practitioners, and emerging leaders from around the world, and as he would say, from Boston to Brussels and from Santiago to Sydney. Jim's leadership of the ILCN over the past decade has seen the network grow from a group of 33 people in 2014 to more than 2,000 participants from across 6 continents. He has helmed 4 global congresses in Berlin, Germany, pictured on this slide, Santiago, Chile, Barcelona, Spain, and today here in Quebec, Canada. The relationships that he has sparked and nurtured have led to millions of dollars for conservation and on-the-ground impact on thousands of hectares of land. We would not be here together today without Jim's tireless efforts. On a personal level, Jim has been an invaluable mentor, friend, and advisor to me, and I know to many of those in this room. Jim, thank you for all that you have done and continue to do for this international community of practice. Please stand and join me in a round of applause for Jim Leather. I'd like to call to the stage ILCN co-founder and managing director of Lime Timber Company, Peter Stein, to announce a new ILCN initiative that will honor and continue Jim's legacy in land conservation. Peter.
Thank you, Chandni, and good afternoon to all of you. As Chandni indicated, I was one of the co-founders. Candidly, I never thought that the International Land Conservation Network would get to this scale, to this range of impacts, to the growth of the partnership. And one of the reasons is I was thinking, could I do this? Could Lauren? No. But Jim could. So, in my mind, Jim is the embodiment of a network catalyst. While many of us in the room have been active participants in the work of ILCN, the results and the future potential would never have been greater than the sum of the individual parts without Jim's drive, leadership, and for a number of us, the early morning phone calls. I have known Jim for 25 plus years and have found him to be an absolute genius at network navigating and supporting the entities and organizations that are the true capital of networks. Jim has been a guide for me. He has actually talked me out of a handful of very crazy ideas. But he's also been a guide for many others in this room and around the globe. Jim and Jane bring to me and Lisa in many ways a great personal relationship and friendship. And as a way to remember Jim's leadership, the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy has decided to create a Conservation Innovation Award. And it will be a competitive process. Every year, an organization or an individual that is demonstrating, and I'm going to use Jim's building blocks of innovation, a creative strategy, a strategic strategy that is measurably effective, transferable, and enduring, will be selected. And we've already raised the funding to begin a stipend of $5,000 a year for the award recipient. So this is to recognize Jim, but also continue to build and strengthen the fabric of networks that support land conservation around the globe. So please join me again in thanking Jim for his leadership.
Thank you, Peter. So now, to close the Congress, I wish to introduce Don Carr, a longtime friend and colleague of the ILCN and Strategic Conservation Director for the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Don.
That's a tough act to follow, Jim. And an emotional one. Congratulations. I have a difficult and it's a bittersweet task of closing out what has been an incredible couple of days. To begin these closing remarks, I just want to share with you a couple of words about who I am. I haven't had an opportunity to meet all of you, but I live in a town called Peterborough, which is just north of Toronto, Canada. It's on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. My family is there, my husband with 2 children, and I just want to acknowledge the fact that we have many families that are standing home, keeping those fires burning for all of us, and I think we have them to thank for allowing us to be here together for these past few days, building and growing relationships. I know I really want to thank, and I think all of us need to thank, the wonderful Elder Diane, who has been with us for these many days. Man, is she special. One thing that Elder Diane taught me, and I know when I was speaking with her, was the idea of listening. And I haven't had much to say over the past few days because I've been taking it seriously, being a keynote listener. I've been listening to the sessions, I've been listening to the conversations you've all been having, I've been watching quite intuitively to the friendships that have been forming. And the one thing I thought I'd start off today's message about was with this phrase, "Yo no way." Yo no way. Do you remember Elder Diane speaking those words to us? You no way. I love you. And what is unique about the ILCN, this Congress, is that we don't often say that to each other as delegates. I love you. We often talk about our work passionately that way. I love my job. I love the work I do. It's making a difference. I love nature. I love connecting with nature because it makes me feel alive. What's different about the ILCN here is that we are building these relationships together for a resilient world. And what has changed for me in my observations of all of you in this room is that those relationships, which may have already been friendships, but there are many new friendships that now exist because these 2 days happened, 2.5 days happened here in Quebec. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm really grateful to Elder Diane for bringing love into the conversation through an incredible smudge ceremony, the drumming, the singing. I know many of you participated in the moon ceremony last night where there was an opportunity to express how you feel about these past few days. So relationships for a resilient world. I don't want any of us to leave here without really thinking about what that means to us in our hearts and in our minds now. It's an amazing theme. And I remember on the opening day when it was John Farner who was speaking, I think he may have been referencing you, John, he said that there's magic in the room. I think we can all agree that there's been magic in many rooms, here, above us, below us, which has been incredibly special, and that magic is a reflection of the need for there to be a whole of society approach that has come up again and again and again. And we heard today too, it's a whole of government in all countries that needs to come together, both, all sectors, cross-functional, cross-sectoral. We need to be having those conversations together because those relationships matter for building and creating resiliency. In Canada, I know it's been referenced that truth and reconciliation has really meant something deeply to us. I get emotional, and I know others do when we think about our responsibility in that journey. One of the lines that come from truth and reconciliation in Canada is that in order to reconcile our relationship with the land, we must first reconcile our relationship with each other. Again, relationships for a resilient world. As I was listening to many sessions, I tried to attend as many as I could, and honestly, there were so many good ones, so I'm gonna have to watch those recordings. I'm really glad that they have been recorded for us to watch. Two-eyed seeing is a phrase that has been expressed many times. Ethical space was something we created in this Congress. But what is amazing, what I observed and as I was listening, around the world, there are different ways that we talk about two-eyed seeing. And I took note of them as I was listening. I've heard expressions around walking two worlds, two-way sight, two-way science. And then Maxi from Namibia, I joined a session where I got to listen to Maxi. She talked about it like, let's mix things up. Let's just bring different cultures together, different ways of seeing, different ways of knowing. And the outcomes from those conversations are inevitably better than what the solution might have been without bringing different ways of knowing together. And that's hard. Rob Prosper, our Vice Chair of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, talked about hard things are hard. And bringing different ways of knowing together is hard, and the challenges that we have to play, the urgency of the situation. We just heard from this panel that we need to change the narrative, change the way that we start speaking about our work, and it's an urgent task. And with that, I think the hard things hard comes to the transition we're all gonna make now as we move from here, feeling the inspiration, our cups are filled. We're gonna leave this conference to do the hard work. And I know some people have had to move on already, but I wanted to ask this question while I have you here, captive audience. How many people here are going to be leaving Quebec to head to Cali over the next day or so? I know I've had many conversations with a few people here, which has been wonderful. COP16 is going to be hard. It's about implementation. Here we have had the privilege of getting to know each other with 250, 280 people in the room. There are going to be thousands there. We need to bring this energy and commitment to COP16 to show what private and civic land conservation can bring to the solution. It's a voice I believe is not heard enough in those conversations. We've just witnessed a pile of solutions, actions that are being undertaken here in Canada, coast to coast to coast, but around the world because of what the work of the ILCN network is doing. Relationships really matter. And one that just came to mind too is I was walking from here to lunch with Tui Rogers, who I believe is another founding member of the ILCN, and he shared with me that the word network was intentionally chosen with ILCN. It wasn't going to be an association. It needed to be a network. And here we are a network, but we are a network of networks. We each represent our own network who is connected to networks. So let's take what we have learned here, the way we feel, the inspiration, the determination, the big thinking. Let's take that into our network of networks so that we can continue to grow this message, grow this network, and make sure that we deliver on the commitments we've been making here to make a difference. People and friendships really matter. Showing up for each other really matters. And I think when I'm closing this out, it was Vincent who was speaking to us earlier. Just taking, Vincent, thank you. What I took from what you were sharing with us today was the sentence you said that this land is at the heart of the nation. And I want to go back to Yonowe, Huron-Wendat for I love you. It's that idea of connecting the heart with the mind, the importance of doing that kind of bringing together in what it is we do. I get emotional about this because the connecting heart and mind is what makes our work so meaningful. And the relationships for a resilient world is about that. It's about love. Love of land, love of each other, doing this work because it matters. And so as we leave here today, I want us not to feel awkward about using that word love and saying, yo no me, I love you. I loved what we've been experiencing here together. I'm grateful for it. We need to be humble and vulnerable in that space. And I hope we feel all comfortable sharing that with one another as we leave here today. So I want to thank you for this opportunity with gratitude and humility. I can't believe I was asked to give the closing remarks to this incredible Congress. And I look forward to getting to know you all better, especially as we reunite in a few years in Australia. So safe travels, everyone. Thank you.